So there's a quote that I wanted to read, and then we'll jump into, Nate's going to go through some particular teachings with you. So this is from a book called Holacracy by Brian J. Robertson. It's highly recommended if you don't know it. And the quote is this: sometimes the conflicts we have in organizational life are actually clashes of the roles involved.
Yo, Gamma.
Hey,
What's
there.
up?
Hey,
Hi,
Daos.
I'm just going to pop you on mute.
We in the wrong place.
I don't know where that's coming from, so I'm going to continue. Sometimes the conflicts we have in organizational life are actually clashes of the roles involved, but we mistake them for clashes between the people filling these roles. Such conflicts become unnecessarily personal. And when we try to resolve them by smoothing over the human relationships, we miss the opportunity to clarify the underlying organizational role relationships, a term I use to mean the relationship between our roles and what those roles need and want of each other, separate from our personal connection. And I believe that that can be aptly applied to many aspects of organizational design, that sometimes it's not just about the human interaction, but clashes and conflict give us an opportunity to have a look at the systems and structures to see where they can be changed. And with that, I'll pass it over to you, Nate, to introduce your session.
Okay, thank you. My name is Nate, and today, let me see, I'm going to stop the video and share my screen. Let's see here. Hopefully this works out. One second. Can you all see my screen?
Not at the moment, Nate.
Okay.
We can see an N, if that's helpful.
Give me 1 second. I have to give permission to Zoom. That's not functioning.
I would also like to thank everyone for joining, and especially Nate and Anna-Marie for facilitating this discussion. And I am sorry for the technical inconveniences. It was that we were migrating from one platform to another, but I feel that right now we are all here, so that will no longer happen.
Okay.
Thank you.
Nate, if you're
Okay.
struggling, oh, you got it? Nate.
No. What were you saying?
No, just if you're struggling to share that, maybe you could share yours in Discourse itself and people could look in there.
Yeah, how about I just go over the teaching? I apologize. I'm having some incompatibilities with this.
Anna-Marie generally needs to give you the.
Yeah, permissions are set. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, it's on my end. Okay, so let's just go through this. So today's session is titled Organizational Design and Creating Pathways for All. So as Anna-Marie mentioned, today is going to be an interactive experience about exploring how to incorporate all the unique elements of decentralized organizations, such as diversity, cultural practices, social and organizational structures, and various individual needs and how they relate to organizational conflict. And one of the goals that the Gravity Working Group has regarding the development of this curriculum is to provide Gravitons with some practical knowledge around mitigating conflicts within decentralized organizations. Comparatively with centralized organizations, we have a good understanding of how conflicts occur, how they are resolved, and to an extent, how to prevent them from happening in the first place. We must learn the same things for Daos. And in order to do that, we must first recognize some of the differences we have compared to traditional organizations. A big part of today's lesson is about making sure that gravitons know what to look out for and how to map conflicts back to the correct source so they can properly be documented and shared with one another. So a quick outline of what we're going to talk about. The goal of the presentation is to provide you with some basic concepts around organizational structure, individual motivation, and exploring DAO dynamics. Just to give you some ideas to think about where conflict originates. Organizational conflict can arise in so many different situational contexts, and it's important to be educated on some of the basic principles. So keep in mind, especially if you already understand some of these concepts that I'm about to go over, that they exist as frameworks for how you think about conflict in the environment in which it emerges. So the first thing we're going to talk about is individual motivation and how it takes shape in decentralized organizations. The second thing we'll talk about is organizational structure, and we'll review some of the more difficult DAO dynamics that we were trying to solve for. And after that, we'll break into discussion groups and perform an exercise, which we'll share at the end. So let's do individual motivation first. So motivation is an important organizational concern, as it is a significant factor in determining why people participate in an organization. Motivation influences whether individuals strive to accomplish either personal or organizational goals, or both, as well as to the extent to which they allow others to direct and control their behaviors. Many of you know Maslow's hierarchy of needs, chart where at the bottom of the pyramid we have our physiological needs, which all of us hopefully have: food, water, shelter. Next up is security. Sorry. So next is our safety and security needs. From an organizational perspective, these needs could be satisfied through things like work agreements, performance feedback, and communicating expectations. Above that, we have our social and affiliative needs, things like love, belonging, and intimacy. These can be achieved in organizations through social events, shared experiences, and community interactions that are not related to work. Then we have esteem and recognition needs, which have to do with the desire to gain status, recognition, and power. From an organizational perspective, this could come in the form of a raise, promotion, or authority over new work. And then finally, at the top of that pyramid, we have self-actualization, where the individual needs match the individual's personal desires. So the reason I'm explaining this to you right now is because by recognizing and appreciating the complexity of human motivation, it allows us to identify some of the areas where DAOs differ from traditional organizations and where they are the same. DAOs cannot offer promotions or grant superior power over organizational functions in the same sense that traditional organizations can. And traditional organizations cannot offer the inclusivity and autonomy over work that DAOs can provide. The important thing to notice is that these differences are structural in context. A man by the name of Frederick Hertzberg iterated on Maslow's hierarchy of needs through a survey where he asked 200 employees to think of a time when they felt exceptionally good or exceptionally bad about their job and explain what happened. Many studies have been conducted after that, which have reinforced his findings. And what he found was that bad feelings were consistently associated with a job's context, things such as working conditions, interpersonal relations, supervision, and rules. These factors led to job dissatisfaction. Good feelings stem from a job's content rather than its context, things like growth, advancement, recognition, and achievement. These factors led to job satisfaction. The thing that Hertzberg recognized is that job dissatisfaction and the factors that caused it, things like rules, supervision, and working conditions, are different than rather than opposite of those factors causing job satisfaction. What he recognized was that the satisfaction and dissatisfaction are actually separate concepts and not opposite ends of the same continuum. So satisfaction is associated to Maslow's higher order of needs, where we have our self-actualization, our basic, I guess, self-actualization and informal things that motivate us. let's see where we at. Not opposite ends of the same continuum. Higher order of needs, while dissatisfaction is associated with Maslow's lower order of needs. So satisfying the lower levels can reduce dissatisfaction, but they will never lead to satisfaction. So things like work agreements and feedback and expectations, they can reduce the amount of dissatisfaction an individual may have when entering an organization, but they'll never lead to satisfaction. Only these higher order needs can accomplish that. So what does this mean for Daos? Well, dissatisfaction stems from environmental and structural elements, while satisfaction stems from social and cultural elements. So, which takes us into kind of the organizational structures that I want to discuss. When we develop organizational structures, it is important to take into consideration that your approach towards organizational design holds the possibility to create a context or an environment that can lead to job dissatisfaction and potentially organizational conflict. We need to recognize that as a possibility. We want to make sure that the safety and security is something that is provided by the systems we design so that they do not lead to individual dissatisfaction. On top of that, we want to ensure that our social layer is able to provide for those upper order needs so that satisfaction can be achieved. And so there are two really, really important theoretical concepts that Graviton should understand about organizational structure. And those two concepts serve as a framework for organizational design, and which are differentiation and integration. Differentiation refers to the degree of specialization within the organization. In essence, this is how we organize the different tasks of the organization, which aligns with its stated purpose. In the TEC, differentiation takes the form of working groups who are specialized to achieve specific organizational goals. And your DAO, it may look something completely different, who knows, but they're organized based on organizational function. The more differentiated the organization is, the more complex its structure becomes. Integration, on the other hand, refers to the mechanisms and procedures that allow for differentiated tasks to be coordinated into purposeful action. So we have differentiation, how we organize ourselves, and integration, which allows us to coordinate that organization into purposeful action. Depending on how we organize ourselves and how we coordinate between those groups has significant implications on determining the environment we all operate in. So some different structural components that are determined through these.
Love to sniff my panties.
Okay, so some different structural components that are determined through these foundational design concepts can lead to organizational conflict. The degree of exposure to resource allocation, legal and formal constraints, more constraints on procedures and spheres of operation creates less autonomy for individuals. The complexity of objectives, evaluation, decision criteria can lead to greater tendency of goals to be conflicting within an organization. These foundational theories have impact on the incentives and the incentive structures that we create. The personal characteristics of employees, variations in personality traits and needs require flexibility and higher need for achievement. So if your organizational design cannot accommodate for these needs for higher achievement, you may run into significant aspects of conflict. So what is it about DAOs that set them apart from our traditional organizations? Exploring DAO dynamics is something that we are currently doing on a daily basis. So a list of some common structural elements within DAOs that have the potential for conflict are a lot. So let's see. The structural components of organizational design have significant influence on organizational conflict. What is important to note here is that most organizational conflict is derived from the integration procedures I spoke of a moment ago, and in particular, communication. Due to a DAO's flat organizational structure, they rely almost entirely on the method of horizontal communication. Horizontal communication serves important purposes for the organization, such as task coordination, problem solving, information sharing, and of course, conflict resolution. This type of communication is likely to be informal rather than formal, oral rather than written, and unofficial rather than official. And since authority is absent from horizontal communication, it can often lead to moments of miscommunication where coordination among peers can take forms which are irrelevant or destructive to organizational functions. An associated problem in DAO dynamics is the problem of agency and discretion. Where there's no clear authoritative power structure, making simple decisions becomes problematic within DAOs. Agency over work is difficult for many people because we have been accustomed to think and act in hierarchical systems where the benefits include a clear chain of command and task distribution. Information sharing is another problem area within DAO dynamics, where miscommunications around doing can lead to a duplication of efforts and increased tension among peers. Next, we have a rewards system. Stratification of rewards systems, meaning different roles get paid differently, and can be a common source of conflict. Individual advancement is really difficult in DAOs due to lack of hierarchical power. So certain forms of advancement, such as creating spirals into and out of greater roles of responsibility, can be really important. It isn't like, I think I find it really interesting that, the things that we look at as weaknesses within DAOs can also be a source of organizational stability in times of change. And conflict and how we design our DAOs can have significant influence on how we create the cultural practices, as well as the social underpinnings that allow us to make decisions within decentralized contexts. So yeah, I apologize for not having the presentation and just reading off the script like a robot, but I hope that some of you got at least some of that and understood a bit of it, because what we want to try to do is to utilize these two aspects, the individual motivation, understanding a hierarchy of needs, and then understanding how organizational design influences those needs within the user experience of any individual entering a DAO. Anna Marie, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that in terms of what we're trying to educate on and for these workout groups.
No, I think that's great. And maybe if you could share your slides in the Gravity channel now, and then anyone that sort of was struggling to listen without that could just have a quick look now, or obviously afterwards as well. But no, I think that's great. Thank you so much, Nate. All right, so let's jump into the practical. So what I'm going to do is share in the chat two different scenarios, and we're going to break into breakout rooms in groups of around 4 to 5, and you're going to have about 20 minutes as a group to explore these two scenarios. As you look at the scenarios, the suggestion is to imagine a situation that perhaps you're already experiencing in a DAO or any kind of organization, or an experience that you've had in a previous organization. And using the wisdom that we all have, that we gather from our time in communities and organizations, to just explore. There's no right or wrong answers here. It's just about what, from our own experiences, what can we bring to these two examples. So the first one that I'm sharing here is about creating spirals into and out of positions of greater responsibility. And I just want to add, if you're not that used to using Zoom, at the bottom of the screen you have the chat option. If you can't see it, if you can't see the chat, just click on the chat box and that should share that with you. Oh, hang on a sec, that's gone to Suga directly. Let me redo it to everyone. Great, so in the chat, the first scenario is about creating spirals into and out of positions of greater responsibility. And some examples that might help your thinking is something along the lines of, could you use rituals of honoring and appreciation? Might you want to bring in time-bound roles? Could you consider having advisor roles that people can step into? Could you have supported hiatus or offboarding periods for members and clear processes for how someone can do that? Or would you perhaps implement knowledge sharing tools that make sure that information is passed over from members stepping out of a position of greater responsibility. So those are just some examples. The second scenario, and it's really up to you as a group to choose which one you think is of greatest interest and that you'd like to explore. The second one this is creating various pathways for inclusion, participation, and autonomy. So here, some examples that might help you is the idea of having groups of various sizes, having clear internal information pathways, having, again, time-bound roles, having maximum group sizes, setting up what some people call pods or crews, which are small groups of not more than 7 that might meet up regularly and form intimate bonds, facilitated spaces for difficult conversations such as power, hierarchy, social capital, gender, and inclusion. And lastly, what about spaces in the calls for reflection and contemplation? So as we put you into the rooms, the chat will stay up, so you get to choose as a group which one you'd like to dive into. I'd ask that someone is chosen or offers to volunteer as a note taker to jot down what are some of the ideas that you come up with, and when we come back together, we will we'll share them with each other. Hi everyone, welcome back. Hey, everyone come back. Great, so we've got 11 minutes to the end of the call, so just want to open this up and invite anyone that'd like to share a bit about their ideas, maybe telling us what you focused on, what some of the ideas were for the group, but also to share like, how was the experience for you? Was there any places that felt stuck or uncomfortable as you were discussing and exploring all of these things? So if you just unmute yourself and share if you would like to tell us a bit about how that was for you. And if not, if you just pop yourself on mute. We got any volunteers?
Well, I'll go only because the first thing your second question I can address immediately, which is that I was just like entering it quite confused and a little anxious about not really understanding the assignment. And I'm still not entirely sure that we're getting that we necessarily came up with what you were looking for per se, but we did at least share some stories about potential areas for conflict in both the Daos spaces and outside of, like, in food space spaces.
Do you want to share what you found confusing about, like, was it the particular instructions or the idea of kind of exploring those different aspects?
I think it's mostly because I just want to, like, I want to do it right or whatever, and so that's the energy that I come at a thing with, and so I was not able to receive the updates that you sent in the middle. I was like, oh shit, are we doing something wrong? Like, we're just talking about our stories and not, like, discussing the examples that you gave.
Oh, well, no, that's fine. You went on your own way. Sure, that's
yeah, we sure did.
And was there some, like, was there anything in the shared stories that really struck you as a group?
Yeah, so one thing we talked a fair bit about just, like, our experiences in different organizations, and how opportunities for conflict can arise. And one particular story that I was asked to share, my particular story, only because it was sort of like a preventative measure, I suppose. There's a bike shop in Tacoma, Washington, where I live, that is in food space. Of course, you can't fix bikes online, and at the beginning of COVID, after they made the decision to, like, remain open through the pandemic and start to figure out how they were going to implement that, one of the processes that they implemented was, like, just a 2-hour session at the beginning of every day. Their first 2 hours of being open, they were not open to the public. They were only open to staff, as an opportunity for the staff to just, like, express the things that were coming up for them from dealing with all of the public, and also express some of the things that they needed from each other in terms of support and like areas where there was developing conflict or whatever, just like opportunities to like off gas some of that and allow them to keep providing this essential service even during a very difficult external situation.
Okay. Cool, great. Thanks for sharing. Is there someone from one of the other groups that would like to share a bit about what came up for you?
Yeah, I just shared some of the notes that we took in group number 1.
Mm-hmm.
And we were discussing about how to create spirals into and out of positions of greater responsibility.
Okay.
And I think we gave really good ideas. I don't know if Tammy or Lynn want to deep dive on some of them, but we talked like of certain rituals to welcome people in groups,
Mm-hmm.
but also other things like when someone is no longer participating in the community, that doesn't make them an enemy or that
Right.
they are ghosts, but
Right.
like even if people is no longer in the community, we can still be friends, and they can still hang around and have like their role and their recognition as a human being. So yeah, I don't know if Lynn or Tam want to share more of what we said.
Sure, I think you covered it pretty well. We were really talking a lot about our experiences in the organizations that we're in. So Juan Carlos and myself at the Token Engineering Commons, Lean with Extinction Rebellion, which she shared some really interesting ideas around how there is a role called locomotive roles in their circles, and these roles have an incentive to be rotating so that things don't get stagnant in terms of like the circles. I thought that was something very interesting and a new, insightful perspective. And then we talked a little bit about like having agency to make decisions, which is perhaps one of the facets of having responsibility, is making decisions for the community, and how important that is. And then this concept of advice process, and having agency to make decisions, but the responsibility of, getting advice from the people impacted by the decisions before you make a decision, but it not being a blocker to the person who has the agency to make the decision, making the decision, but having consulted people who will be impacted. And then the idea of rituals as well. And maybe that came from, the rituals of honoring and appreciation, I think is also important too. And we shared some of those that we've experienced. And Lean, would you like to add anything else? Or Forrest or Umberto or Nick?
You did an amazing job. It was good. Thank you.
Wow. Well, I mean, I think they sound extraordinary. I think you're absolutely right. I think it's very easy to treat someone that's perhaps removing their time and their energy from a community as a kind of, there's something painful about that, and therefore the relationship kind of changes. I think that's really spot on to notice that, and it doesn't have to be that way. And I also think that's a fascinating idea about having roles that are incentivized to keep them rolling over, so that you're constantly getting people moving in and out of that responsibility. Fascinating. I love that so much. And will you share those specific ideas in the Graviton channel for us all as well? Brilliant. We've got a couple more minutes. It'd be lovely to hear from maybe one of the other groups.
Yeah, I can talk if you'd like. Can I share my screen? Because this is a thing that I shared in the group. And I've shared it in Gravity before, but basically we were talking about, the potential that problems could arise at any level of this. This is basically a graphic that I made that shows kind of what I've come to think of as like the cellular process for people to interact. And So if you're coming out of like a centralized organization, the curation, which is like the fixed stuff we've done, the way we've always done it, can often be this conflict because people don't want to break out of that. But I find that in Daos, this gravity style interaction, where you have somebody who's moderating and they're kind of holding space for what's been done and holding space for the yes and part of the connective cross-pollination emotional portion of that. That's why I call them the educational change agent, because the technical change agent is generally done, you know, as a kind of after we've done all this other work, we kind of end up here, you know, and we can also start here, but we should go through this process of, and I often find that each one of these three sections, people can get bogged down. People could get bogged down, and I didn't know enough to consent to something. They can get bogged down into, you know, maybe somebody didn't ask them what was alive in them, so they didn't engage, for example, or they didn't go through a process of sense making, so they could grasp the whole context of everything. So there's a kind of in the original ask, it was very much talking about this second thing, which is how is it that we create these pathways? And I think just recognizing that there is a rough structure to how things go in the DAO space that might be different than in other spaces. And that's why I made this graphic, because I was wanting to kind of document how that functioned. So
Great.
I hope it was helpful.
Brilliant. Yeah. I love that. And is there anyone else from that group that wants to share? Perhaps we've got just a couple more minutes about, like, were there any examples of like specific things you think that could be specific structures or anything in a DAO that could be useful to help as you kind of navigate those potential discomforts?
If I can say something, I was very interested in one point that was made about when you're asking questions because you're trying to direction find, it's that process about asking for consent.
Right.
And so I kind of thought that was a very interesting comment that we discussed, I think in part, but maybe not as deeply as we could have.
Right. Okay. So what your discovery was, or your feeling was that if you're feeling uncomfortable, if you ask for consent, that gives agreement on all sides. You know what's and that.
Yeah, and sometimes asking for consent isn't viewed positively either.
Right. Okay. Right. Well, we've come to the end of our time. Like, absolutely, I'd love to. I'm sure we could spend another 15-20 minutes, which would have been amazing. But perhaps if you feel comfortable, it'd be great for the groups to share in Gravity about which of the specific exercise or examples you explored in your group, and what were the different solutions and ideas you came up with. And yeah, thank you so much for joining. I believe you've got your next session the same time next week. Brilliant. Well, I'm sure Nate will say, do you want to say goodbye? And
Thank you, everybody.
all right, bye everyone. Have a good day, evening, morning.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
for
Thank
joining.
you.
And thanks, Anna and Nate. It was a great experience.
Yeah. thank you.
Pleasure. Glad you enjoyed.
Thanks, Anna. Thanks, Nate. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Later.
Thanks, Anna. Thanks, Nate.